The last rays of the fading sun illuminated the dusty road as Zara O'Connor stumbled toward the lonely ranch house, her heart pounding with desperation and her fingers clutching a worn letter that had led her across 3 states. The journey west had stripped her of everything: her savings, her strength, and nearly her dignity, but she had made it to Whispering Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, with nothing but determination and a fading hope. "Please," she whispered to herself, gathering what little courage remained as she approached the weathered door of the isolated homestead. "Please be here." Blood caked her torn dress where a stagecoach accident had left her injured days earlier. Her auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now fell in tangled waves around her face. 22 years of proper Boston upbringing had not prepared her for the harshness of frontier life, but the letter from her late father's business partner suggesting a safe haven had been her only option after her family's financial ruin and sudden death. Zara's trembling hand knocked 3 times against the solid oak door. The sound seemed to echo across the vast open plains surrounding the property. From inside, she heard the scrape of a chair against wooden floorboards, followed by heavy footsteps. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with shoulders as broad as the horizon. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of beard, but his eyes, sharp, ice blue, and immediately suspicious, locked onto hers. "Quinn Forrester?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the evening wind. The man's expression hardened. "Who's asking?" "My name is Zara O'Connor. My father was Thomas O'Connor." "I believe you knew him." "I know no O'Connors," he interrupted, his voice as cold as a mountain stream. "You've got the wrong place." Before she could protest or explain further, the door slammed shut in her face with such force that dust from the porch swirled around her skirts. Zara stood there, stunned into silence, her last hope crumbling before her eyes. "But the letter," she whispered to the unyielding door. Exhaustion, hunger, and despair washed over her in a sudden wave. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and the last thing she remembered was the feeling of falling as darkness claimed her. Quinn Forrester leaned his forehead against the door he'd just slammed, cursing under his breath. The name O'Connor had sent a jolt of pain through him so fierce it had nearly brought him to his knees. 5 years hadn't been enough to dull that particular wound. Thomas O'Connor, the man whose business dealings had cost Quinn everything: his investment, his reputation back east, and indirectly, his younger brother's life. And now, some woman claiming to be O'Connor's daughter had shown up on his doorstep, looking like death warmed over but still maintaining that air of Eastern refinement he'd grown to despise. He turned away, determined to forget her, when a soft thud from the porch stopped him cold. Instinct overrode bitter memories as he yanked the door open again. The woman Zara lay crumpled on his porch like a discarded doll, a folded paper still clutched in her limp hand. Blood had soaked through her dress at the shoulder, and her face was pale as the moon now rising over the distant mountains. "Damn it all to hell," Quinn muttered, scooping her up with surprising gentleness for a man his size. He told himself he was just being decent, that he'd do the same for any injured creature that found its way to his door. It meant nothing that she was beautiful beneath the dirt and blood, or that she smelled faintly of lavender despite her obvious hardships. He carried her inside and placed her on his bed, the only proper piece of furniture in his Spartan home. For a moment, he simply stood there, conflicted and angry at the intrusion into his carefully constructed solitude. "What am I supposed to do with you now?" he asked the unconscious woman, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. His eyes fell on the paper still clutched in her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he carefully extracted it from her grip and unfolded it. His breath caught when he recognized the handwriting. The letter was from Harold Myers, Thomas O'Connor's former business partner and Quinn's one-time friend. It explained that Thomas had died penniless, that his daughter was alone in the world, and that Quinn's ranch was suggested as a safe haven for her while she decided her future path. Of all the meddling, presumptuous, Quinn crumpled the letter in his fist. Harold knew perfectly well what had happened between him and O'Connor. This felt like a cruel joke. The woman on his bed stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her lips. Quinn's anger faltered. Whatever grievances he held against her father, this young woman clearly needed help. He could at least tend to her wounds, give her a meal, and send her on her way in the morning. With practiced efficiency born from years of tending injured livestock and the occasional ranch hand, Quinn gathered clean cloths, water, and the medicinal supplies he kept on hand. The wound on her shoulder wasn't deep but had clearly been neglected and was showing signs of infection. As he worked to clean and bandage it, Zara's eyes fluttered open. They were a striking shade of green that reminded Quinn of spring grass after a rain. "Am I dead?" she whispered. Despite himself, Quinn's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Not yet, though you seem to be making an effort in that direction." Confusion clouded her face as she tried to sit up, then winced in pain. You closed the door. You turned me away." Quinn's momentary amusement vanished. "And now I'm patching you up. Don't read too much into it, Miss O'Connor. Come morning, you'll be on your way." "To where?" The simple question held no self-pity, only a practical inquiry that caught him off guard. "That's not my concern," he replied, more harshly than he'd intended. "The town of Whispering Creek is 15 miles east. They have a small hotel." "I have no money left," she said matter-of-factly. "The stagecoach accident 3 days ago cost me my trunk and what little I had. I walked the rest of the way here." Quinn paused in his ministrations, genuinely surprised. "You walked 15 miles with an infected wound?" For the first time, a flash of pride crossed her face. "I did what was necessary, Mr. Forrester." Something about her quiet determination stirred an unwelcome admiration in Quinn. Most Eastern women of his acquaintance would have collapsed at the first sign of discomfort. "You can stay the night," he conceded gruffly. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes already drifting closed again from exhaustion. Quinn watched her for a moment longer than necessary before retreating to make a pallet for himself by the fireplace. He had the uncomfortable feeling that Zara O'Connor represented a complication he wasn't prepared to face, not just because of her father, but because of something in those determined green eyes that had momentarily cut through the carefully constructed barriers around his heart. Morning brought the smell of coffee and the unfamiliar sound of movement in Quinn's kitchen. He blinked awake, disoriented to find himself on the floor rather than in his bed, before remembering the events of the previous evening. Rising quickly, he made his way to the kitchen to find Zara O'Connor standing at his stove. Her hair neatly braided and her dress, though still torn and stained, brushed as clean as possible. She had found his apron and tied it around her waist. The sight of her moving about his kitchen with such quiet efficiency stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. She turned, seemingly unsurprised by his presence. "Making breakfast. It seemed the least I could do after your hospitality." There was no irony in her voice despite his earlier rudeness. "I don't recall offering you free run of my home." Zara's chin lifted slightly. "I needed to eat, Mr. Forrester, and I assumed you might as well. If I've overstepped, I apologize." The formality of her response highlighted the impropriety of their situation. An unmarried woman spending the night in a bachelor's home would cause scandal in town if anyone knew. Not that Quinn particularly cared what Whispering Creek thought of him. He'd been the subject of gossip and speculation since his arrival 5 years ago. "You mentioned Harold Myers in your letter," Quinn said, changing the subject as he poured himself coffee from the pot she'd prepared. "How is the old scoundrel?" "Dead," Zara replied simply. 3 months ago. Consumption." Quinn nearly dropped his cup. Harold's dead. The news hit him harder than expected. Despite everything, Harold had been one of the few connections to his past life that Quinn had maintained, albeit through infrequent letters. Yes, he arranged this before he passed. She hesitated before continuing. He seemed to think you might be willing to help me, given your history with my father. Quinn barked a harsh laugh. Harold always did have a warped sense of humor. Confusion crossed Zara's face. I don't understand. My father always spoke highly of you as a business partner. He said you were the most honorable man he'd ever known. The words hit Quinn like a physical blow. Your father said that? Thomas O'Connor described me as honorable. Yes. Why would that surprise you? Quinn set his coffee cup down with deliberate care, struggling to contain the surge of anger and bitterness. Miss O'Connor, your father ruined me financially, destroyed my reputation, and indirectly caused my brother's death. If he spoke of me as honorable, it was the final lie in a lifetime of deception. Zara's face paled. That can't be true. My father was a respected businessman. He was a con man and a thief, Quinn interrupted flatly. He convinced investors, myself included, to put their money into a silver mine that didn't exist. When it all fell apart, he somehow emerged unscathed while the rest of us lost everything. I had to sell my family home to cover debts. My younger brother Jack, desperate to help, took work in a dangerous mine and was killed in a collapse. Zara gripped the edge of the table, visibly shaken. I knew nothing of this. Nothing. How convenient, Quinn said coldly, though a small part of him recognized the genuine shock in her eyes. My father shielded me from his business affairs, she said quietly. After my mother died when I was 12, I was sent to a boarding school. I only returned home during holidays. When he died, there was nothing left. The house was seized for debts. The furniture sold. I found Harold's letter among my father's papers. The simple statement carried no self-pity, only a straightforward acceptance that made Quinn's harsh judgment falter. Still, years of bitterness couldn't be dispelled so easily. What exactly did you expect from me, Miss O'Connor? To welcome the daughter of the man who destroyed my life with open arms. She met his gaze directly. I expected nothing. I hoped for temporary shelter while I found my footing. I can cook, clean, so I'm willing to work for my keep. This isn't a charity house, Quinn said, though with less conviction than before. I'm not asking for charity, Zara replied, a spark of pride flashing in her eyes. I'm offering an exchange of services for lodging, temporarily. Quinn studied her for a long moment. Despite her obviously weakened condition, there was a core of strength to Zara O'Connor that he couldn't help but respect. And if he were honest with himself, the ranch house had been neglected in the years since he'd sent his housekeeper back east to care for her ailing sister. 2 weeks, he said finally. You can stay and work for 2 weeks. That should give you time to heal properly and make arrangements elsewhere. Relief washed over her face, quickly replaced by determination. Thank you. You won't regret it. I already do, Quinn muttered, but without the venom of the previous night. First order of business is getting you some proper clothes. Can't have you working in that ruined dress. I know you don't have any money, he interrupted. Consider it an advance on your wages. He turned away before she could respond, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. This arrangement was purely practical, he told himself. Nothing more. The fact that Thomas O'Connor's daughter was under his roof meant nothing. And if he felt any stirring of attraction toward those intelligent green eyes and quiet dignity, well, that was something he would simply have to ignore. For her part, Zara watched Quinn's broad back as he stalked out of the kitchen, wondering what kind of man lay beneath that gruff exterior, the honorable businessman her father had described, or the bitter, isolated rancher who had slammed his door in her face. She suspected the truth lay somewhere in between, and despite everything, she found herself wanting to discover it. The first week passed in a rhythm of careful negotiation of space, of boundaries, of the unspoken tension that hung between them. Zara proved herself capable and hardworking, transforming the neglected ranch house with quiet efficiency. Quinn found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience, though he kept his distance as much as possible. He'd purchased her 2 simple work dresses, a nightgown, and basic necessities from the general store in town, ignoring the curious looks from Mrs. Davenport, the shopkeeper's wife. The clothes were plain but practical, and Zara had accepted them with simple gratitude that made him uncomfortable. On the 8th day, Quinn returned from checking fence lines to find Zara standing on a chair in the kitchen, attempting to reach a high shelf. Before he could warn her, the chair wobbled. Quinn moved with surprising speed for a man his size, catching her around the waist before she could fall. For a moment, they froze in that position, his hands spanning her waist. Her hands braced against his shoulders, their faces inches apart. Quinn was suddenly, acutely aware of her warmth, the faint scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite everything, and the surprised widening of those remarkable green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against his face. Quinn set her down abruptly and stepped back. "You should be more careful." "I'm sorry. I was trying to reach the flower." Her cheeks had flushed a becoming pink. Quinn reached up and easily retrieved the flower canister, setting it on the counter. "Just ask next time." "You weren't here," she pointed out reasonably. "And I wanted to have dinner ready when you returned." "You don't need to," he stopped, taking in the rest of the kitchen for the first time. A rich, savory smell emanated from a pot on the stove. Fresh baked bread sat cooling on the table, alongside a jar of preserved peaches he hadn't even known he had. "You found my mother's recipe book," he said, surprised. The battered volume had been pushed to the back of a cupboard years ago, too painful a reminder of the family he'd lost. Zara nodded hesitantly. "I hope you don't mind. I was looking for inspiration, and it seemed well loved." It was. Quinn paused, and used to sharing personal information. "She taught me to cook before she died. Said a man should know how to feed himself properly." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. The unexpected memory brought a pang rather than the usual sharp grief. "What are you making?" "Beef stew, from your mother's recipe. I noticed you've been bringing in more firewood than usual. The ranch hands in town mentioned there's a cold snap coming." The casual reference to ranch hands gave Quinn pause. "You've been to town?" Zara busied herself with the stew, avoiding his gaze. "I walked in yesterday while you were checking the north pasture. I wanted to inquire about potential positions." Something uncomfortably like disappointment settled in Quinn's chest. "Finding your way out of here already?" "Our arrangement is for 2 weeks," she reminded him quietly. "I need to plan accordingly." Of course she did. Quinn should have been relieved that she was being practical, that she had no intention of trying to extend her stay. Instead, he found himself oddly unsettled by the thought of the ranch house returning to its empty silence. "Any luck?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual as he washed his hands at the sink. "Not much. The saloon is looking for girls, but—" She trailed off, a slight shudder running through her. "No," Quinn said sharply, surprising them both with his vehemence. "That's not an option." Zara raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize you had a say in my future employment, Mr. Forrester." The formal address stung after days of careful cooperation. "I don't. But no decent woman should have to work in that place." "Decent women sometimes have limited choices," she replied quietly. "But I agree. I prefer something else. The hotel might need help with laundry and cleaning, though the pay is barely enough to cover a room there. Quinn dried his hands, wrestling with thoughts he hadn't expected to have. The stew smells good, he said finally, changing the subject. Dinner that night was unusually quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As Zara cleared the dishes, Quinn finally broke the silence. My foreman quit last month. Zara looked up, surprised by the non-sequitur. I'm sorry to hear that. I need someone to keep the books, manage supplies, coordinate with the ranch hands who come for seasonal work. Quinn stared into his coffee cup as if it held profound secrets. Someone who can cook wouldn't be amiss either. Zara set down the plate she was washing. Are you offering me a position, Mr. Forrester? It would be proper, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. There's a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house. It was built for the foreman but never used. He preferred to stay in town. You could live there, separate, proper. You're offering me a job, Zara repeated, this time not a question. Quinn finally looked at her. Yes. Why? The simple question hung between them. Because you're capable. Because you need work. Because he stopped, unwilling to examine his motivations too closely. Because you feel responsible for me? Zara suggested. Out of guilt over my father's actions. Quinn's jaw tightened. I have nothing to feel guilty about regarding Thomas O'Connor. Then why? Does it matter? It's a job offer, not a marriage proposal, he snapped, immediately regretting his choice of words when a flush spread across her cheeks. I'll consider it, Zara said carefully, but I would need to know more about what the position entails. Relief washed over Quinn, though he was careful not to show it. Fair enough. We can discuss details tomorrow. The pay would be modest but include room and board. Thank you for the opportunity, she said formally. I'll give it serious thought. Later that night, Quinn lay awake on his pallet by the fireplace, questioning his own sanity. Offering Zara a permanent position on his ranch went against every protective barrier he'd built since coming west. Yet the thought of her working at the saloon or struggling to survive on laundry wages sat like a stone in his gut. It was purely practical, he told himself. She was educated, organized, and a good cook. The ranch could use someone like her. It had nothing to do with the way sunlight caught in her hair or how her rare smiles transformed her face. Nothing at all. In the bedroom, Zara also lay awake, considering Quinn's unexpected offer. The position would give her security and independence, rare commodities for a woman alone in the West. But it would also mean remaining in close proximity to a man who both attracted and confused her. A man who had every reason to hate her family name yet had shown her unexpected kindness. As she drifted toward sleep, Zara wondered what her father had really known about Quinn Forrester, and why he had spoken so highly of a man he had apparently wronged so deeply. The promised cold snap arrived the next morning with a vengeance. Quinn awoke to frost on the inside of the windows and his breath visible in the chill air. He quickly built up the fire before Zara emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a blanket over her dress. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. "It seems winter decided to arrive early." Quinn nodded, trying not to notice how the morning light illuminated her features or how disarmingly domestic the scene felt. "I need to check on the horses and bring in more firewood. We might be in for a proper storm." "I'll have hot coffee waiting when you return," she promised, moving to the stove. Outside, the wind cut through Quinn's coat like knives. The sky had a heavy, threatening look that experienced ranchers recognized as the prelude to a serious snowstorm. As he secured the livestock and gathered firewood, Quinn calculated supplies and preparations with the efficiency of someone who had weathered many such storms alone. Only this time he wasn't alone. The thought brought an unexpected comfort that Quinn immediately tried to dismiss. Zara O'Connor was a temporary presence in his life even if she accepted the foreman position. Their relationship would be strictly professional. He had no business finding comfort in her presence. When he returned to the house, arms laden with firewood, the transformation inside took him by surprise. Zara had hung quilts over the windows to block drafts, moved his mother's rocking chair closer to the fire, and had coffee and hot porridge waiting. The simple domesticity of the scene made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "I hope you don't mind," she said, noticing his expression. "I found the quilts in a chest. My grandmother taught me how to prepare for winter storms." "It's fine," Quinn said gruffly, setting down the wood. "Good thinking, actually. This storm looks to be a bad one. We might be snowed in for a couple of days." Zara poured him coffee in a mug that had been warming by the fire. "Then I suppose we have time to discuss that job offer in detail." Quinn accepted the mug, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Suppose we do." They settled at the kitchen table, and Quinn outlined the duties of the position: managing accounts, coordinating supplies, overseeing the seasonal hands who helped with cattle drives and harvests. As he spoke, Zara asked intelligent questions that confirmed his instinct about her capabilities. The pay would be $30 a month, plus room and board, he concluded. The cabin would need some work, but it's sound. "That's a generous offer," Zara said thoughtfully. "More than I could make elsewhere." "It's what the position is worth," Quinn said simply. "I don't believe in underpaying just because you're a woman." Zara studied him over her coffee cup. "That's a progressive attitude for these parts. My mother ran our family finances back east. She was better with numbers than my father ever was." Quinn found himself sharing more than he'd intended. "She taught me that ability matters more than what's proper." "She sounds remarkable." "She was." Quinn hesitated, then added quietly, "You remind me of her sometimes. The way you don't complain, just get things done." The simple compliment seemed to touch Zara deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. The storm intensified throughout the day, wind howling around the eaves and snow piling against the windows. They spent the hours in surprisingly companionable work, Quinn repairing tack and tools while Zara mended clothing and linens she'd found in need of attention. Occasionally they spoke, but more often they worked in a comfortable silence broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's fury outside. As evening approached, Quinn checked the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure against the worsening weather. When he returned to the main room, he found Zara standing by his small bookshelf, examining the few volumes he'd brought from his previous life. "You have the complete works of Shakespeare," she observed with surprise. "My mother insisted on education, even out here in the wilderness," Quinn replied. "Those were hers." "May I?" Zara asked, her fingers hovering over a leather-bound volume. "Help yourself." She selected a volume and returned to her seat by the fire. The simple domesticity of the scene struck Quinn again, a woman reading by his fireplace while a storm raged outside, the smell of stew simmering on the stove. It created an illusion of home that both comforted and disturbed him. Later, after they'd eaten and the hour grew late, Quinn prepared his pallet by the fire as usual. The temperature had dropped further, and even with the fire blazing, the floor would be uncomfortably cold. "This is ridiculous," Zara said suddenly. Quinn looked up, startled. "What is?" "You sleeping on the floor in your own home. The bed is large enough for both of us if we stay to our respective sides. We're both adults." Quinn stared at her, genuinely shocked by the suggestion. "That would be inappropriate. More inappropriate than you potentially falling ill from sleeping on a freezing floor?" Zara challenged. "I trust you to behave honorably, Mr. Forrester. Do you not trust yourself?" The question struck uncomfortably close to Quinn's private concerns. The truth was, he didn't entirely trust his growing attraction to Zara. but he was also a man of discipline and principle. "It's not about trust," he said carefully. "It's about propriety. Propriety seems a luxury when the temperature is dropping this rapidly," Zara replied practically. "We can place a bolster between us if it makes you more comfortable." Quinn rubbed his jaw, considering. The floor was indeed bitterly cold, and the pragmatic solution made sense, even if it tested his carefully maintained boundaries. "Fine," he conceded finally, "but I'll stay on top of the covers. You take the blankets." Zara nodded, accepting the compromise. A sensible solution. Despite the practical arrangements, bedtime became a careful dance of averted eyes and maintained distance. Quinn lay rigidly on his side of the bed, acutely aware of Zara's presence just inches away, separated by blankets and propriety but undeniably present. "Good night, Mr. Forrester," she said quietly. "Good night, Miss O'Connor." After a pause, he added, "I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Quinn." In the darkness, he could almost sense her smile. "Then you must call me Zara." "Zara," he repeated, testing the name. It felt strangely intimate in the dark room, with the storm howling outside and her warmth so near. Sleep came slowly that night, but when it did, it was deeper and more peaceful than Quinn had known in years. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them in a world of enforced intimacy and unexpected revelations. They fell into a routine of shared meals, divided chores, and evening conversations that gradually moved from safe topics to more personal terrain. Each night, they maintained their careful arrangement in the bed, though Quinn found himself increasingly aware of Zara's presence, her scent, the sound of her breathing, the occasional brush of movement through the barrier of blankets. On the 3rd evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Zara finally asked the question that had lingered between them. "Will you tell me what happened with my father?" The full story, not just the outline. Quinn's instinct was to refuse, to keep that wound private. But something about the shared isolation of the storm and the quiet understanding in Zara's eyes made him reconsider. "I met Thomas O'Connor in 1869, he began slowly. "I was 23, just back from the war, with an inheritance from my grandfather and ambitions to build something of my own. Your father was charismatic, convincing. He talked about a silver mine in Colorado with such conviction that I could almost see the veins of or in the rock." Quinn stared into the fire, lost in painful memories. "I invested everything, convinced others to do the same. My brother Jack put in his savings too, against my advice. When it all fell apart, when we discovered there was no silver, that the assay reports had been falsified, I lost everything. But the money wasn't the worst of it." He paused, the old anger and grief rising like bile. Jack was devastated. He'd just gotten engaged, had plans to buy land of his own. He took work in a real mine, dangerous work he wasn't trained for, trying to recoup some of his losses. 3 months later, there was a cave-in. "I'm so sorry," Zara whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your father disappeared before he could face any consequences. Some of the other investors found him in San Francisco a year later, but he'd already transferred his assets to untouchable accounts. He was untouchable by law, if not by conscience." Quinn's voice hardened. "I came west to start over, left everything behind." "I had no idea," Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. I never saw that side of him. He was always kind to me, generous with his time and affection, if not often present." "Men like your father compartmentalize," Quinn said, without the bitterness she might have expected. "He probably was a good father, just a dishonest businessman." "It doesn't excuse what he did," Zara said firmly. "Nothing could. But I want you to know that in his final days he spoke of regrets. He never specified what they were, but perhaps Perhaps he knew the weight of his actions in the end. Quinn studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found only honest grief and remorse for actions not her own. "Why did you come here, Zara?" "The real reason." She met his gaze steadily. "Harold's letter mentioned you as someone honorable who might offer temporary shelter while I sorted out my future. I had nowhere else to go. But he never explained your history with my father." "Harold always did have a twisted sense of right and wrong," Quinn said with a hint of reluctant fondness. "He probably thought it would be poetic justice, Thomas O'Connor's daughter seeking help from the man he ruined. Or perhaps he thought it might offer you both some form of closure," Zara suggested quietly. "Harold knew he was dying when he wrote to me. Perhaps he was trying to right old wrongs in his own way." The thought had merit, Quinn had to admit. Harold had always been a meddler, but rarely without purpose. "I should hate you," Quinn said, the words lacking any real venom. "Or at least resent you. But you don't." The question held a vulnerability that caught at something in Quinn's chest. "No," he admitted. "I don't." They sat in silence for a long moment, the confession hanging between them. Finally, Zara spoke again. "I've decided to accept your job offer," she said, "if it still stands." Relief washed over Quinn, though he was careful not to show too much. "It stands. Good." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her face and made something twist in Quinn's chest. "I believe we'll work well together, Quinn Forrester." "I believe we might," he agreed, returning her smile with a tentative one of his own. That night, as they maintained their careful arrangement in the shared bed, something had shifted between them, not a breaking of boundaries, but a softening. The wall of bitterness Quinn had built around his heart had developed its first significant crack, and try as he might, he couldn't bring himself to repair it. The storm broke on the fourth morning, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. The sun sparkled off snow-laden branches and drifts that reached halfway up the windows. It would be days before the roads were passable, but the immediate confinement had ended. Quinn stood on the porch, surveying his property with a rancher's practiced eye, assessing damage and work to be done. Behind him, the door opened as Zara stepped out, wrapped in a borrowed coat too large for her frame. "It's beautiful," she said, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I've never seen such unbroken white." Quinn nodded, seeing the familiar landscape through her fresh perspective. "It is something, isn't it? We'll need to check on the livestock, make sure none of the outbuildings were damaged." "I'll help," Zara offered immediately. Quinn glanced at her, about to refuse, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. If she was going to be his foreman, she would need to know all aspects of the ranch operations. "Put on an extra pair of my socks inside those boots," he advised instead. "The snow's deep." They spent the morning assessing the ranch, Quinn pointing out boundaries and features as they went. The work was hard in the deep snow, but Zara kept pace without complaint, asking intelligent questions and taking mental notes. By the time they reached the small cabin that would become her home, both were cold but invigorated by the exertion. "It needs work," Quinn said as they approached the structure. "But the roof is sound, and the chimney draws well." The cabin was simple, one main room with a small bedroom partitioned off at the back, a stone fireplace, and basic furniture covered in dust cloths. But the windows faced east to catch the morning sun, and the craftsmanship was solid. "It's perfect," Zara said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "It just needs cleaning and some small repairs. We can work on it together once the snow melts enough," Quinn offered. "Should be ready for you to move in within a couple of weeks." Zara nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across her features. "That sounds reasonable." They returned to the main house as the short winter day began to fade. The evening passed much like the previous ones, except now their conversations included plans for the ranch's spring operations and improvements to the cabin. It felt strangely natural, this partnership they were forming, built on mutual respect that had somehow emerged from the ashes of old grievances. As they prepared for sleep that night, Quinn found himself reluctant to return to the careful distance they'd maintained. Something had changed between them during these storm-bound days, something important that he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. "Zara," he said as she was about to extinguish the lamp. "I'm glad you came here." She paused, the light illuminating her profile in soft gold. "Even though I'm an O'Connor?" "Because you're you," he corrected quietly. "Not your father's daughter, but Zara. Just Zara." She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his in the lamplight. "And who is Quinn Forrester, beyond the man my father wronged?" It was a profound question, one that made Quinn realize how much of his identity had been defined by that old betrayal and bitterness. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "But I'd like to find out." Zara's smile was soft in the golden light. "I'd like to see that too." The lamp extinguished, leaving them in darkness broken only by moonlight reflecting off snow through the windows. They maintained their physical distance that night, but something had bridged the space between them, something tentative, but growing stronger with each shared day. The weeks that followed brought a gradual thaw, both in the landscape and between Quinn and Zara. As the snow receded, they worked together to prepare the cabin, repair winter damage to outbuildings, and plan for the spring cattle operations. Their professional partnership developed a rhythm of mutual respect and complementary skills, Quinn's practical knowledge of ranching balanced by Zara's organizational abilities and fresh perspective. The cabin transformation became a focal point for both of them. Quinn found himself putting extra care into repairs, crafting a small bookshelf for Zara's few possessions, and even riding to town to purchase fabric for curtains that Mrs. Davenport suggested would brighten the place considerably. Tongues wagged in Whispering Creek about the mysterious woman staying at the Forrester Ranch, but Quinn's forbidding expression when questioned effectively silenced most direct inquiries. Still, he was aware of the potential damage to Zara's reputation and hurried the cabin preparations accordingly. One evening in late February, as they shared dinner in the main house, Quinn broached the subject that had been on his mind. "The cabin will be ready by the end of the week," he said, watching Zara's reaction carefully. "We should probably make your position official before you move in. Might help quiet some of the gossip in town." Zara set down her fork. "You're concerned about my reputation?" "People talk," Quinn said simply. "I don't care what they say about me, but you're just starting your life here." "What do you suggest?" Zara asked. "A formal contract, signed in town, witnessed by the lawyer and banker." Quinn hesitated, then added, "And perhaps you might consider using your mother's maiden name, at least professionally. O'Connor still carries some negative associations in certain circles." Pain flickered across Zara's face at the suggestion, quickly masked. "I see. It's just a practical consideration," Quinn added quickly, "to give you a fresh start." "My mother's name was Olson," Zara said after a moment. "Zara Olson does have a certain simplicity to it." "You don't have to decide now," Quinn said, recognizing the conflict in her expression. "It was just a thought." They finished their meal in silence, a new tension between them that Quinn didn't fully understand. Later, as Zara washed dishes and Quinn dried them, a routine they'd established without discussion, she finally spoke. "I'm not ashamed of who I am, Quinn. My father did terrible things, yes, but denying my name feels like denying part of myself." Quinn set down the plate he was drying. "I understand. It was a poor suggestion." "No, it was practical. You've always been practical." She turned to face him, her hands still damp from the dishwater. "But I need to know, does my name still come between us? Does O'Connor still taste like bitterness when you say it?" The direct question caught Quinn off guard. I don't know, he answered honestly. Sometimes, maybe, less than before. Zara nodded, accepting his honesty even if the answer wasn't what she'd hoped for. Then perhaps Olsen is the better choice, for now at least. A professional name, not a denial of my heritage. Zara, Quinn said, stepping closer. Whatever name you choose, it doesn't change who you are to me now. And who am I to you? She asked, the simple question holding layers of meaning. Quinn looked at her, really looked at the woman who had arrived on his doorstep half dead from exhaustion and had somehow become essential to his days. Her strength, her intelligence, her quiet dignity had broken through defenses he'd thought impenetrable. Someone I never expected, he said finally. Someone I can't imagine not having in my life anymore. It wasn't a declaration of love, they weren't ready for that, but it was an acknowledgement of importance that made Zara's eyes brighten with emotion. That's enough, she said softly. For now, that's enough. The day Zara moved into the cabin marked a new chapter in their evolving relationship. The small structure had been transformed clean, repaired, and made comfortable with simple touches that reflected both their contributions. A bookshelf held volumes borrowed from Quinn's collection, curtains softened the windows, and a colorful quilt brightened the bed. Quinn helped carry her few possessions, the clothes he'd purchased for her, personal items she'd acquired in town, and a small box containing mementos of her former life. As they arranged these in her new space, the physical distance the move created felt both necessary and somehow painful. It feels strange, Zara admitted as they stood in the completed cabin. Having my own space again. You'll get used to it, Quinn said, though he was already wondering how he would adjust to the silence of the main house without her presence. You're welcome to come for dinner, she offered. I may have gotten used to cooking for two. Quinn smiled, grateful for the invitation that would bridge their new separation. I'd like that. The transition proved more challenging than either had anticipated. Their work relationship flourished, Zara quickly mastering ranch operations and introducing efficiencies that impressed even the skeptical seasonal hands who returned as spring approached. But the easy intimacy they had developed during their shared confinement now had to find new expression across the physical space between main house and cabin. They established new routines: breakfast at the main house to discuss the day's work, separate duties during daylight hours, and dinner often shared at one dwelling or the other. The arrangement was proper, professional, and increasingly frustrating to them both, though neither admitted it openly. Spring brought new demands as calving season arrived, consuming their days with exhausting work and leaving little energy for navigating the complex emotions growing between them. Quinn watched Zara throw herself into ranch work with the same determination she'd shown since her arrival, proving her worth 10 times over to the ranch hands who had initially viewed a female foreman with skepticism. One particularly challenging day involved a difficult birth that required both their attention for hours. By the time the calf was safely delivered and nursing, both were exhausted, splattered with mud and other substances, but satisfied with the outcome. You have a natural way with the animals, Quinn observed as they walked wearily back toward the main buildings in the fading light. They trust you. Zara smiled tiredly. Animals are often better judges of character than people. They sense intention rather than history. The simple observation struck Quinn deeply. Is that what you've done with me? Sensed intention rather than history. Zara stopped walking, turning to face him in the golden evening light. I've tried to see you as you are now, not as the man defined by what my father did. Just as you've tried to see me as more than Thomas O'Connor's daughter. She paused, then added softly, sometimes it's easier than others. Quinn reached out impulsively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It gets easier every day. The touch, simple as it was, sent warmth spreading through Zara's chest. For a moment, they stood there, suspended in possibility, before Quinn reluctantly lowered his hand. "We should clean up," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It's been a long day." Zara nodded, the moment passing but not forgotten. "Yes, it has." That night, alone in his too empty house, Quinn faced the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. What he felt for Zara had moved far beyond professional respect or even friendship. Somewhere between her arrival on his doorstep and now, she had become essential to his happiness in a way no one had been since before his losses. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Opening himself to those feelings meant risking the hard-won peace he'd built in his isolated existence. More importantly, it meant fully releasing the bitterness that had defined him for so long, letting go of the last vestiges of resentment toward the O'Connor name. Could he do that? Could he separate Zara entirely from her father's legacy in his heart, not just in his mind? In her cabin, Zara wrestled with similar questions. Her feelings for Quinn had grown steadily since those first stormy days, building on admiration for his integrity and character. But she wasn't naive. She understood that her father's shadow still stretched between them, no matter how they tried to move beyond it. What future could they have if that shadow never fully lifted? Could love, still unspoken between them, be enough to overcome such a painful past? The questions remained unanswered as spring flowed into early summer, the ranch flourishing under their joint management. They settled into a partnership that functioned smoothly on the surface while underneath, unacknowledged currents continued to strengthen. The catalyst came in late June, with the arrival of a letter addressed to Quinn in familiar handwriting. Harold Meyer's distinctive scrawl was unmistakable, despite the man being months in his grave. "It was among his effects," explained the clerk who'd delivered it from town. "His solicitor just got around to forwarding it." Quinn stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it in the privacy of his office. The letter inside was dated just weeks before Harold's death. "Quinn," it began without preamble, "if you're reading this, I've finally succumbed to this damnable cough. Before I go, there's a truth you deserve to know, one I've carried too long out of misplaced loyalty and perhaps my own cowardice." Quinn's heart pounded as he read on. Thomas O'Connor was not the mastermind behind the silver mine scheme. I was. The falsified assay reports came from my hand, not his. Thomas believed in that mine as much as you did. He invested everything he had, just as you did. When it collapsed, he protected me by taking the blame, knowing his reputation could weather the storm while mine, with previous financial scandals, could not. Quinn's hands shook as he continued reading. "He paid a terrible price for my crime, lost everything, including his oldest friendships. I promised to look after his daughter if anything happened to him, a poor recompense for his sacrifice. Now, as I face my maker, I cannot go with this lie still between us. Thomas was many things, but in this instance, he was the most loyal friend a man could ask for, too loyal for his own good." The letter continued with details, dates, evidence that supported Harold's confession. It ended with a simple plea for forgiveness, not for himself, but for Thomas O'Connor. Quinn sat motionless, the letter clutched in his hand, as years of bitter certainty crumbled around him. Everything he had believed, every justification for his anger and isolation, was built on a foundation that had just been pulled away. Thomas O'Connor had been innocent, and Quinn had hated him, hated his memory, initially even his daughter, for 5 years without cause. The realization was physically painful, a crushing weight of wrongness that made it difficult to breathe. Quinn stood abruptly, needing air, needing movement, needing Zara. He needed to tell Zara. He found her in the vegetable garden she'd started behind her cabin, kneeling in the soil, her hat protecting her from the summer sun. She looked up at his approach, her smile fading as she registered his expression. "Quinn, what's wrong?" Wordlessly, he handed her the letter. Zara stood, wiping her hands on her apron before taking it. As she read, her expressions shifted from confusion to shock to a profound, vindicated grief that broke Quinn's heart all over again. "I knew it," she whispered when she finished. "I knew my father wasn't what they said. I knew it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, tears of relief, of justified faith, of years of doubt finally resolved. Quinn stood helplessly, watching her process a truth that changed everything between them. "Zara," he began, not knowing what to say but needing to speak. "I was wrong. About everything. About your father. About you." She looked up at him, tears still flowing freely. "You believed what everyone believed. What Harold wanted everyone to believe. I should have questioned it. Should have looked deeper." Quinn's voice was rough with emotion. "Can you ever forgive me?" Zara's expression softened through her tears. "There's nothing to forgive, Quinn. You were another victim in all this, just like my father." Her generosity, her ability to see beyond her own pain to his, undid the last of Quinn's resistance. In 3 strides, he closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with a desperation he couldn't contain. "I love you," he said against her hair, the words bursting from him like water through a broken dam. "God help me. I've been fighting it for months, but I love you, Zara O'Connor." She pulled back enough to see his face, her own alight with joy despite the tears still shining in her eyes. "Say it again," she whispered. "My name. All of it." "Zara O'Connor," Quinn repeated, understanding the significance. "I love you, Zara O'Connor." This time, when he spoke her name, there was no bitterness, no shadow of old grievances, only reverence and love, and the promise of a future unencumbered by the past. "I love you too," she said, lifting her face to his. "I think I have since that first night, when you took me in despite everything you believed." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to create even the smallest distance between them. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because I need to make amends or because it's proper, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because these months have shown me what it means to truly share a life with someone." Zara's smile was radiant through the remnants of her tears. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quinn Forrester." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Whispering Creek, with the entire town turning out for the event. The story of Harold's letter had spread, transforming Zara from a woman of questionable background to the wrong daughter of a misunderstood man. Quinn cared little for the town's changing opinion. His own heart had made its decision long before Harold's confession. As summer flowed into fall and then winter again, the ranch prospered under their joint care. The cabin became Quinn's office, while they shared the main house as husband and wife. Zara's garden expanded, Quinn's cattle herd grew, and the bitter man who had once slammed his door in the face of a desperate woman gradually became unrecognizable, replaced by someone who knew the value of opening not just his door, but his heart. One winter evening, almost exactly a year after Zara's arrival, they sat together by the fire in the main house. Outside, snow fell softly, reminiscent of the storm that had first forced them into close quarters. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have gone?" Zara asked, her head resting against Quinn's shoulder. "If you hadn't opened the door again that night?" Quinn's arm tightened around her. "I try not to. The thought of you out there alone." He shook his head. "Something made me check. Providence, maybe. Or perhaps my father watching over us both," Zara suggested quietly. Quinn considered this, no longer finding the idea painful. Perhaps. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "I knocked and you turned me away," Zara mused. But then you opened everything, your home, your life, eventually your heart. And said I never will again, Quinn finished, turning to kiss her forehead. Never will I close my door or my heart to you, Zara Forrester. That's a promise I intend to keep for all our days. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in a blanket of pristine white, while inside, the warmth of their love held winter at bay. Two people who had begun as strangers defined by a bitter past had found in each other not just healing, but a future brighter than either could have imagined on that fateful night when a desperate knock had changed both their lives forever. Spring brought new life to the Forrester Ranch calves in the pastures, shoots in Zara's expanded garden, and the first stirrings of the child she carried beneath her heart. When she told Quinn the news, his face transformed with such wonder and joy that Zara fell in love with him all over again. A family, he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our family. Years passed, seasons flowed one into another, and the ranch grew prosperous under their careful stewardship. Their first child, a daughter they named Hope, was joined by two brothers, Thomas, named for the grandfather whose name had been cleared, and Jack, in memory of the uncle he would never meet. The cabin that had briefly been Zara's home eventually became a schoolroom for their children and others from neighboring ranches, with Zara teaching reading and figures during the winter months when ranch work slowed. Quinn expanded the main house to accommodate their growing family, building with his own hands rooms that echoed with laughter and occasional squabbles. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Quinn took Zara's hand in his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he'd placed there a decade earlier. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Coming west, finding me at my worst, building a life so different from what you must have imagined as a girl in Boston? Zara turned to him, the years having only enhanced her beauty in his eyes. Not for a single moment, she said with the quiet certainty that had first captured his heart. This is exactly where I was meant to be. Quinn leaned over to kiss her, still marveling at how fortunate he was that she had knocked on his door on that fateful evening, and that despite his initial rejection, they had found their way to this shared life, one built on truth, forgiveness, and a love that had healed them both. I never will, he murmured against her lips, repeating the promise that had become a refrain between them over the years. Never will I regret a single day with you, Zara Forrester. Not a single day. And as the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had built from the ashes of old wounds, a testament to the power of second chances, open hearts, and the unexpected paths that sometimes lead exactly where we need to go.